If you've seen enough videos in my Resident Evil Retrospective series, you would know that the remake of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is my favorite installment in the entire franchise. I knew at some point, though, I wanted to go back and experience its original version in all its glory. I felt it was only necessary and fair to play through both adaptations of this exciting and action-packed story, to do it the most justice within my multi-part series. Having now played it for the first time in its entirety, I can tell you that it has a welcomed flavor all its own. Following the immense success of Resident Evil 2 in 1998, developer Capcom began working on multiple spin-off Resident Evil projects simultaneously, made by smaller teams with lower budgets, to help bridge the gap until the next major entry could be finished. The game that would ultimately become Resident Evil 3 went through a few iterations, but the idea was to have it center around a protagonist escaping Raccoon City that had become overrun by the T-virus, introduced in the first two games. The decision was then made to have this protagonist be the familiar Jill Valentine, a member of the STARS unit of the city's police department, one of the playable characters in Resident Evil 1. Playing the original Resident Evil 3, I could quickly see how it shares many of the same noted shortcomings its remake had from a few years back. You can tell it was made using stripped-down and recycled assets from its predecessor to shorten the development window. I found a lot of its survival horror elements to be de-emphasized, more so than I was expecting. Having read a lot about this game online, fans seem to gush over it immensely due to their nostalgia. I found the game to be very linear. Most of the map layouts in it were overly simplistic. The challenge related to inventory management was essentially non-existent in this one, because I found myself effectively moving back and forth along a straight line, with flashing blue points of interest scattered throughout it. Solving puzzles in RE3 felt more like climbing up and down a set of stairs than it did a game of pinball or chess with multiple moving parts to them, if that makes any sense. I didn't find there to be a whole lot of strategy when it came to dealing with the regular enemies. You aren't given as many opportunities to run around and avoid the monsters like you are in other entries. Just like in its remake, it leans heavier into the action, promotes the idea of plowing right through them. Resident Evil 3 has you running around a lot of narrow and claustrophobic areas, with its tank controls and fixed camera angles. You'd assume you'd be at a disadvantage, but I rarely doubted my level of ammunition and healing items when I engaged most of the zombies, even on the hard difficulty setting. The smaller corridors made headshots a lot easier to set up and pull off. The game provides you with plenty of explosive objects in the environment you can shoot to take out several enemies at once and conserve even more ammo. Because so many of the monsters were eliminated, any of the backtracking this game had me perform felt rather dull. RE3 does make an attempt to spawn more enemies into select areas, having them break out of cars, through windows, and out doorways. A few acted as solid jump scares that took me off guard, but these instances were too few in number to make any real difference overall. I think the game world here just didn't feel as dynamic and alive as it should have. It felt more artificial, shallow compared to a lot of the other Resident Evils, even the other tank control ones I've played. Even though the sometimes mindless traversal and weak inventory management was a bit disappointing, taking a noticeable hit from other RE entries, the game, much like its remake, was so enjoyable to me because of how action-heavy and fast-paced it was. Its goal is to keep you going, keep you moving, and ensure you're not as afraid to open fire on anything that stands in your way. Resident Evil 3 isn't the kind of game you're meant to take too seriously. Its approach is that of an action movie. It's made to be a thrilling roller coaster ride from start to end. I said that the standard enemies rarely gave me any trouble. They didn't test my survival horror sensibilities all that much, but I don't think they're really supposed to. They're merely distractions to keep you occupied until the main event obstacle decides to show his ugly mug, Nemesis. He's a heavily built, unstoppable, Terminator-like tyrant who had been infected with a special parasite that mutated his body and increased his intelligence. Nemesis is a prototype bioweapon created by the dastardly and corrupt pharmaceutical company Umbrella to track down and kill any surviving STARS members still left in Raccoon City, interfering with their plans. He's got exposed parts of his body that have visible scar tissue. His dark clothing is covered with various straps and belts to keep the parasite inside him contained. Resident Evil 3 is all about you versus Nemesis, that's its focus. It's a multi-round grudge match to the death between you and this hideous monstrosity. Either he goes or you go, no ifs, ands, or buts. He moves incredibly fast despite his size. Even when he's seemingly been taken out of the equation, he always finds a way to come back for more. What surprised me most about playing RE3 for the first time is just how many fucking bullets it takes to put this bastard down. I was expecting it to be more than the previous tyrants, and on the internet I had read that he was spongy, but Christ almighty, I never would have figured it would take close to 60 rounds from the handgun alone. You do get stronger weapons like the shotgun, grenade launcher, assault rifle, and of course the trusty magnum you can mix into the batch, but if there's one thing that did make me question my supply count, it was Nemesis. Fuck all the other enemies. They're a joke when put next to him. In my playthrough, even though my skills with the awkward dodge maneuver had grown quite decent, I still didn't manage to down him all that much to acquire a lot of his useful drops. Fighting him with the tank controls was just too exhausting of an ordeal. The longer it went, the more mistakes I'd make, so more often than not, I just ran from him like a chicken shit. The only times I did defeat him were when I would be forced into a scripted boss fight against him, or, like in the restaurant, when it was Carlos and I, 2 versus 1, and the combined efforts of my shotgun and his assault rifle sealed Nemi's fate. I loved the pulse-pounding live selections that would happen at certain points in the story too, where the screen would flash into a photo negative, and you would be given 2 options, some of which giving you automatic defeats against Nemesis, like when you hide in the restaurant's kitchen and blow him up, electrocute him on top of the clock tower, or, like a complete badass, charge the fucker and push him off a bridge. Nemesis is aggressive, he's imposing, his appearances throw a wrench into your plans just as you start feeling like you've got things figured out. The game does a great job toying with your expectations, having him not show up when you think he will, and then show up when you think he won't, which keeps you on edge. The sound design also doesn't help. At certain points, like in the police station, it made it sound like doors were slamming or something large was crashing up against them. During my playthrough, I would begin wincing with dread the longer it went without a section featuring Nemesis. I knew he had to be somewhere, watching, waiting. And when he did give chase, I'd run into a new area, into presumed safety, only to hear a door slam when the camera switched, a guttural roar, and the son of a bitch would be right up my ass again. Most of your encounters with Nemesis allow you to simply run away, but if you're feeling bold, you can fight him, and as long as you are playing on hard mode, can drop him to acquire specialty weapon parts, first aid boxes, and other useful goodies. Word of warning though, you need to do this twice. The first time he falls to the ground, he will get back up, and white goop will start emanating out of his right hand, almost like he's in a rage mode or something. Nemesis can grab you around the neck and throw you to the ground, at which point you have to mash buttons to get back up before he can grab you again and damage you further. Oftentimes, when you are thrown to the ground, you can find yourself in this frustrating attack loop with him, unable to do a whole hell of a lot to get out of it. Once Nemesis starts transforming and is able to use his tendrils to grab onto you from a distance, that's when things get really annoying though. The tank controls become a severe detriment to the gameplay in Resident Evil 3, which I didn't think I'd ever hear myself saying. The dodge move can be mistakenly performed because it's mapped to the same button as the aim and shoot. I found myself locked in loops of that animation as well, when all I wanted to do was retaliate. You simply can't move fast enough and smoothly enough to avoid Nemi's attacks properly. It's really janky and borderline broken at times. It'd be better if you could move and shoot simultaneously, which apparently was initially planned for the game. It was in Capcom's Dino Crisis earlier that same year, but I don't know why it was cut from this one. Having now played both versions of Resident Evil 3 and seeing the original version of Nemesis in action, I don't know why he's considered so vastly superior to the one in the remake. I think he's been overestimated a bit. It's due to nostalgia. Horror games like this would have a much greater impact on you in your adolescence than when you're an adult. I admit, his design in the original is much scarier. Something about it feels more gruesome, primal. It's got a certain creep factor to it that the remake wasn't able to fully recapture for one reason or another, but he's clearly got problems as well. Things about him that can be easily exploited. The stun locking due to the awkward and outdated tank controls pushed beyond their limits. In terms of total screen time, whether that be cutscene or actual gameplay, this Nemesis appears about the same amount as the one in the remake. It's probably pretty damn close. Playing the OG Resident Evil 3, he popped up much less than I was expecting him to. I thought he'd be on my ass for a lot longer and a lot more frequent than he was. It's not like he's random. He only appears at scripted moments, depending on what items you have found and what location you are presently in. He has the exact same cinematic feel that the Nemesis does in the remake in that regard. Yes, you get stalked by him more than in the new game after he mutates, and yes, fighting him is a lot more challenging, especially in those early parts when you don't have the stronger weapons. But you can also run away from him, and after a few quick location changes, you'll hear him yell out stars and give up his chase, which I found disheartening and kinda lame to be honest. People bitch that the remake had sequences getting you to hold an analog stick in a single direction to evade him. Here, you're just holding square with the D-pad in a single direction, and then tapping X a few times to initiate the glorified loading screens. Don't sugarcoat it and deny that this gameplay loop doesn't get boring and predictable after a while too, because it definitely does. There are some genuinely frightening jump scares with Nemesis that made me have to go change my drawers, but some of these sequences make him so easily avoidable that it's almost laughable. I wish the game gave you even more ammo than it does, so you could engage him, get up close and personal with him in every instance. I'd have had it so that he pursues you relentlessly until you drop him, or reach the next story cutscene or live selection moment to maintain this emotional intensity throughout. Seeing this bioweapon designed to kill you give up as often as it did without any interference whatsoever really messed with the illusion. Capcom could have even given him less hit points, so that yes, you would down him a lot more often, but he would also regenerate himself and reappear a lot more often as well, for a jump scare when your guard is down. I'm not trying to be overly negative here regarding Nemesis. I love his concept, design, and I like how he's handled in this game for the most part. I'm just trying to put things into perspective. The remake of RE3 did cut content and alter the structure of many of the Nemesis encounters in the latter parts of the game, but I think it's unfair calling the older version of him head and shoulders above the new, because it too has its flaws with the gameplay. It wasn't fully realized as strongly as it could have been either. Both versions of Nemesis really aren't perfect. They each have pros and cons, and bring something to the table the other doesn't. The games they find themselves in are also just as fun and replayable in my opinion. Whenever I do any marathons of the Resident Evil series in the future, I'll be making a stop at both. I'd be a lunatic not to. I'm not going to be summarizing the story in this game again. I did that in my review of the remake a couple years back, but I do want to go through some of the key changes, which ones I like and which ones I didn't from what I experienced in the new game. For starters, being an older installment in this franchise, RE3 Nemesis uses 3D models of its characters over top of gorgeous and grisly pre-rendered backgrounds. These look incredible and set the mood for this eerie and miserable narrative. Because the graphics are more primitive, sometimes I didn't know what certain things were supposed to be at first glance, only to realize that I had been staring at bodies, or something equally terrifying. In the dead factory at the end of the game, I loved walking through the aftermath of that battle between the mercenaries and a group of tyrants. By my count, there were 5. The other ones dropped by that helicopter carrying Mr. X in Resident Evil 2. RE3 is set primarily outside among the streets of Raccoon City. Just like the remake, I love the contrast of the colorful neon signs and storefronts with the darkened back alleys, sets it apart from other entries in this series. Walking through the park cemetery that had zombies crawling out of the ground was awesome, made it feel like a monster movie. I like how you start out with 6 inventory slots, but eventually are given a green satchel by Carlos to increase it an additional 2, the amount Jill had in Resident Evil 1 in the Spencer Mansion. In that game, though, she was all decked out in her STARS gear. It made sense. Here, she's walking around in a miniskirt and tube top. I get that it's supposed to be her casual wear. She had probably returned to her apartment after a night out, but you'd think once she realized the T-virus outbreak had spilled into the city, she would have changed into something more practical. I mentioned in my review of the remake of the game that the intro for Nemesis is a lot stronger in the original. It involves him killing one of your allies right in front of you, Brad Vickers, which really builds him up as this serious threat. Later in the remake, when you can kill his zombified form playing as Carlos, it made absolutely no sense. Carlos had no connection to the man whatsoever. His death meant nothing and was a waste of time and energy. The voice acting in the game, much like the other entries in the original trilogy, can be unintentionally funny at times. I laughed when Mikhail said he felt so useless on the trolley despite seconds earlier single-handedly gunning down a bunch of zombies and rolling an explosive barrel into them. Bitch, you've carried your weight better than most would. Don't be so hard on yourself. Speaking about some of the omissions in the remake that were found in the original game, I'm glad the Gravedigger worm was removed. You fight it a couple times, but man, was it not fun in either instance. It was either clunky as hell with the fixed camera angles underground, or easy as fuck waiting for it to pop out before blasting it in the park, walking back and forth like an idiot, over and over again. I also found the smaller wormy things it spawns in a few of the areas in the game that can cover you head to toe to be irritating. I can go without all of it, the weakest parts of Resident Evil 3 by a mile. A lot of fans bring up the removal of the clock tower section in the remake. It's cool and all, but it's not like I have any significant connection to it. I never played this game when it first came out. I honestly was hoping to spend more time in the clock tower than you do. I thought the sequence was pretty short, all things considered. Puzzle-wise, the one having you match the notes of the large music box was one of my favorites in the whole game. Despite its easy solution, one of the notes you can select in each section is clearly in tune and the other is way off the fucking mark. The other puzzle in the clock tower was maddening though, one of the worst and most cryptic I've ever had to do in these RE games. It took me a lot longer than I'd like to admit to understand what was going on with it. Basically, you have these three statues holding balls of amber, obsidian, and crystal. Placing these balls in trays below the three paintings in the room changes the time on the clocks they surround. Depending on which type of ball is placed on which painting tray, it adds or subtracts several hours. All three need to match and display midnight. Ugh. Once the clock tower is operational again, I do love the fake-out ending you get with all the joyous music. Jill says it's finally over and then wham, Nemesis blows up the getaway chopper with an RPG. What an asshole. Nemesis poisons Jill with the parasite. Carlos shoots the rocket launcher he's holding and the explosion downs him, but he quickly rises to his feet and you have to take him on in a tough one-on-one battle. Afterwards, he walks into a nearby fire and collapses into it. He's toast, right? There's no way he survived that. I found the Carlos section in the hospital where you get the vaccine to save Jill to be weaker than it was in the remake. Much like a lot of the game, it's over so fast, right when it starts getting interesting. Feels rushed. Using his assault rifle to down hordes of zombies was great though. There was another cryptic puzzle in the hospital. You have to move a cart in one of the rooms into the matching corner it's in an adjacent room. I figured it out pretty quickly, surprisingly, but it's weirdly constructed, an odd one. When you return to the clock tower's church, the ceiling shakes. Something above you is making itself known. It's Nemesis in his second form, all burnt up, with some of his containment suit destroyed, allowing more of the parasite in his body to come out and say hello. Fighting him again here is a lot easier than in the park. Carlos's assault rifle fires more rounds, and he also gets up a lot faster than Jill when he's knocked down. He must have more health. The final stretch of the game has you playing as Jill again, inside an Umbrella research facility, disguised as an abandoned factory. Notes you find indicate that any civilians caught trespassing in the surrounding area are forcefully experimented on. Terrible. The dead factory is a neat location that was replaced in the remake with another generic nest facility, much like the one that had been featured in Resident Evil 2, but I don't get too flustered over that change. The trade-off for me is that the remake did a much better job exploring the origins and creation of the Nemesis tyrant. While cliché, I do prefer Nikolai's characterization in the remake over the original game. The developers were able to flesh out his motivations a bit more. The way he dies in the original is a lot more satisfying though. It happens sooner than in the remake. Nemesis lifts him into the ceiling like a xenomorph would, and Jill witnesses the aftermath, his body up top and blood dripping and pooling on the ground below. Fucking brutal. It's what lures Jill into that waste disposal room where Nemesis corners you in what is simultaneously one of the best and worst boss battles in the entire Resident Evil series to me. I like the idea behind it, melting parts of Nemesis down with the pipes filled with corrosive acid. It's epic, but using the fixed camera and tank controls to avoid Nemesis and aim your weapon accurately to shoot and turn the nozzles at the proper moment is infuriating. I died here so many times it got sickening. All of it is just so awkward, unresponsive. It's aged badly from a gameplay perspective. It's a shame. I wanted to enjoy it a lot more than I did. The final boss of the game is just as epic as it is in the remake. The parasite's regeneration had gone into overdrive after Nemesis fell into that vat of acid. While I find the remake's final form of Nemesis to be cooler from a graphical standpoint, the one in the original makes more sense, looking as though you took a bunch of body parts and hastily glued them together. It's fucking disgusting. I don't even know what I'm looking at anymore. Someone please kill it. Jill?
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
I have no intention of going back and reviewing any of the other games in the original trilogy. The only reason I made a second video for Resident Evil 3 is because I'm biased. It's my favorite entry in the series. I can't help it. The remake of it also had a lot more controversy surrounding it compared to the others. It gave me an excuse to experience both interpretations of this story. No offense, but I highly doubt the original versions of RE1 and 2 accomplish anything their remakes don't do better in every conceivable way. Then again, I always tell myself this stuff, that I'm done, that I won't do any more, but having been bitten by the virus that is Resident Evil, I always have this sick craving to devour more and more. I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching this latest installment in my Resident Evil retrospective. I hope you enjoyed it and were entertained by it in some way. If you'd like to support my channel and everything it is that I try to do on here, you can do so by subscribing, hitting that bell icon to receive updates, sharing my videos to as many people as you can to help me grow, and by becoming a producer over on Patreon, only if you can. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, and always stay nerdy.